I feel like money really is a magnifier.
It's the failures that define you.
I can't talk about my story without talking about God.
It's picking yourself back up, recognizing the issues, having enough wherewithal to recognize the problems that you had, and enough willpower and internal drive to do it again. What's up, guys? Today, we have a special guest with us, close friend of ours. He's a real estate guy. He's a builder, and I'm sure he's doing a lot more things that we're going to find out today that I don't even know yet. So, Will Jackson, I'm glad you're here. I know you have a good story, and I'm happy to share with everybody. And hopefully you guys can find some nuggets in what we are doing here, trying to help the entrepreneur take that step. Quit being an entrepreneur. Quit sitting on the couch thinking about it over and over and over. Take our advice. Take that step. Listen to some of these challenges that we have and that we're sharing with you guys so that you can not make the same mistakes that we do. And hopefully make a life for yourself you never thought you had. So, Will, glad you're here.
Honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You bet, man.
Yeah.
I'm excited. So, let's give the listeners just a little bit of maybe the beginning portion of your life, because if it was anything like mine, right, and I know the guys who are listening probably heard my story, is I didn't come from a bunch of money, right? I've had my share of challenges, like probably everybody who's watching this, and been able to get past those challenges and, make a better life for myself and my family, right? So give us a little history, just a brief history about maybe some of the, where you came from, a little bit about you before you are the man you are now, and we'll get into that.
Absolutely. So I'm from a fairly middle income family. My dad was a general contractor and had in the 70s he had multiple businesses in commercial real estate and home building and metal stud and drywall company. Several things, but after the 80s, he pulled way back, and so. But I grew up, just watching him be a self-perform contractor, pretty much every trade in commercial construction. So we would, working with him, we would do the dirt work, we would pour the concrete, we would stain the cabinets, we would do the metal studs and drywall. Like, we would do it all.
So you had some good hands-on experience in the
Yeah.
construction world growing up.
Yeah.
I didn't have that. My dad was a body man, a paint and body
Was
man.
he?
Yeah. So, and I did not want to do that. Like, he tried to get me into that, and I just, number one, I'm kind of colorblind, which is very odd. I have some different color palettes, and I just can't tell the difference, right?
Yeah.
I didn't really actually know that I was colorblind for a very, very long time.
Okay.
I'd got in trouble and then went to MEP, where you go through the Army. I can't think of what it's called. MEPS, I think is what it's called.
Okay.
Anyways, long story short, but they told me I had depth perception issues and I was colorblind to these different things I never even knew. But
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and it's like that with so many things in my life where I didn't know I was blind in areas until somebody told me.
Yeah, it's weird. I was like, this is really odd. Are you serious?
Just things. I've got blind spots, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I got in a lot of trouble, and I dropped out of high school, and struggled with drugs and alcohol from a young age, and I started working for a steel erector when I turned 18 that subcontracted work from my dad. And I was always a thrill seeker, and so that fit right in line with walking I-beams and all that stuff. Like, I fell in love with it immediately, and so I started subcontracting work with my dad. We would self-perform putting up the building. So I hired on a few guys working for my dad after that, and he didn't have enough work to keep a whole crew busy. So that's when I started subcontracting at probably 20 years old or so. And still struggled with alcohol in my life. Drugs and alcohol came and went through my 20s. And I grew that business that it was just as a steel erector. We didn't supply buildings at that time for through my 20s. And, got to where I had about 25 employees at one time. And so fairly successful.
Especially in the early 20s.
Yeah. And so for me, it was kind of like from where I had been and being a high school dropout, I had kind of these insecurities. And so it was like, oh,
big dog.
These other guys are still spinning their wheels in college, and I'm making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the whole mentality around that. But really, I was insecure.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear a lot of people, they're high school dropouts, and then they made something of themselves, kind of like you have.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's an interesting point that you make, and I hope the people who are watching is when you're in the situation when you come from not having a whole lot, and then you make some good decisions, and you've taken some hurdles, right? And all of a sudden, money starts coming in, right? Mm-hmm. It can change you, and it gives you an interesting dynamic in your life because things become available, right? That weren't available before.
Yeah,
and then like anybody else, everybody has an ego of some degree.
Yeah.
Right. And when you compound money on top of that, especially at an age like 20, in your early 20s, I can't imagine. Like, I think you and I have a lot of similarities because I battled some of the same battles that you were talking about with drugs and alcohol, but I didn't start making any money until I was in my early 30s. Well, I mean, four or 5 years ago, right? So early 30s, which I had made a decision to have kids, right? I waited a long time till I was in my early 30s to have kids, and then kind of got my crap together, if you will, right?
Yeah.
But I'd had some of those same challenges, and I think if I was at that age and having that, I think anybody who's watching, right, money doesn't solve the problems, so to speak, right? It can exacerbate whatever kind of issues you've already kind of self-proclaimed, if you will. That's why I think this is going to be a fun podcast too, because a lot of people, if you're watching this and you're in your early 20s and you're going to take that leap and you come into money and you've made good decisions and you've taken that risk and you're starting to get the rewards, is take a step back, number one, right, and really evaluate what's important, because money can be used as something that will really exacerbate any issues that you currently have, and ultimately it could affect your business. And I know I've heard some stories of some friends that I have, and they went through some real hard times, and not the same exact scenario, but getting into drugs because they had the money, and sometimes you have the free time, and a lot of times idle hands, right? Can really get you. But go ahead, sorry.
No, that's great. And I feel like money really is a magnifier of your heart. And I found that out, I think my heart was I didn't feel great inside, but what I projected was look what I can do, and because of those insecurities.
Yeah.
And so I eventually crashed and burned. My addiction caught up with me, and I spent a few years until I was 30 years old really just trying to figure things out, so to speak.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say is that, but what's interesting is the age in which you kind of started finding a little success, right? Mm-hmm. And how that you took that. You're probably on top of the world, and then, your insecurities got the best of you, right? Your ego, your insecurities, you crashed and burned, right? And then something happened, right? And then you've made a change, right? Let's talk about that. You made a change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's get into that, because this is the meat and potatoes, and we always talk about, failures, right? And I like to really push on failures, because if you're an entrepreneur currently and watching this, or you want to be, there's a very high likelihood that you're going to see a lot of failures, right? And it's the failures that define you. It's when you fail, it's picking yourself back up, recognizing the issues, right? Having enough wherewithal, right, to recognize the problems that you had, and enough willpower and internal drive to do it again, right? And at some point, in my perspective, if you fail, you get up and you go again. And if you fail again, you get up and you go again, right? And that's the difference, right? Is, an entrepreneur goes through these issues, and they have problems, and then they self-reflect. They have enough willpower to change, do it again, keep driving, and keep pushing, right? Because if you give up, that's when you actually fail. Failure is just a piece of life, right? And everybody's going to go through it. But if you can fail, recognize, move forward positively, get back on your feet, keep pushing forward, I think eventually you're gonna figure it out. You can't just stop. You know what I mean? It's the stopping piece that I'm driving for everybody who's listening, is that if you fail and you make a mistake or have a bad deal, or I've had plenty of them and I've shared them on here, but it's not stopping at that point. It's gathering yourself, understanding what you did wrong, and moving forward positively.
Absolutely.
Right. So let's hear about your the change in your life, right?
Yeah.
And what happened, and then we'll get into kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I can't talk about my story without talking about God. And I was in the darkest place of my life, and I got saved. I got filled with the Holy Spirit. And I wish I could say that everything, stayed great, but it didn't. I had to learn some more lessons through that. But when I finally made a decision, I had at this point in time, when I was 30, I had 3 kids with 3 different women. I had started my business 3 times, and I had fallen on my face more times than I care to mention. And I finally recognized that the answer was God. And when I did that, instead of having all of these goals that were good goals but didn't sustain me, I made the one goal in my life to continue to grow closer to God. That's it. And it's still, that's still my main goal today, is to grow closer to God. And that looks, a little bit different than it did then, but it still remains the same. And so from that point on, that's when my life went, vertical and horizontal. I've been clean and sober for 16 years, coming up in January.
Wow, good job.
And I got really plugged into a home church and got into men's ministry. And I met my wife, who was basically the polar opposite of me. She had been in ministry ever since she got out of high school. Yeah. And so I met her in a life group, and God really blessed me with her. Yeah. And so moving forward from there, I wanted to be a dad to my kids, and that was my number one priority. And frankly, none of their moms thought I should be in their life as much as I thought I should. And so I started trying to do things the right, go through the court proceedings to get more visitation and things like that. And I was working for my dad just by the hour. And I was fine doing that. And because I was scared to death of making money, because look what money did before, yeah. Right?
Interesting.
And so, and what I want to talk about is motive. Our motive for things matters. And so when I got a bill one month for $11,000 for attorney fees for trying to get more visitation with my kids, I realized that what I was doing for work, it wasn't going to sustain wasn't going to sustain us. And so I started, the Lord showed me during that time to write down a list of all the reasons why I should start a business. And so that changed from a fear of owning my own business again to really it being a platform to have a better life.
So I'm going to recap that a little bit because I think you've put some nuggets in there that people need to rehear, right? Okay. And that's sounds to me, tell me if I'm wrong here, but you reached a point where you were trying to start seeing your kids more, right? Mm-hmm. And you recognized, due to all the bills that were coming in, right, that what you're currently going and doing for work wasn't gonna suffice, right? You had found the Lord, and He told you essentially to write down some, we'll call them motives, like I think you said, right? Some meanings for doing what you're doing. And I think the piece of this that people need to hear that I think is gold is your motive matters, right? And
Absolutely.
finding motive in what you're doing, right? And the motive needs to be on your heart, right? The motive is coming from the heart, right? Of, hey, you're not doing this to, and I'm not saying this works for everybody, but I think it is a good nugget, is the motive was getting time with your kids, right? Doing things that weren't for your ego, right? Mm-hmm. That were for a higher calling, if you will.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So
a purpose.
A purpose. I like that. Like, so the motive and your purpose. So I think that's a good nugget for people who are watching to understand is, if the motive of what you're doing in entrepreneurship is ill-guided, right? That there's probably it can be some consequences to that, right? And I think that's a nugget, man. I think that, I find that in myself, and I'm not even saying that it's making me kind of rethink about some things, mm-hmm. right? On purpose and motive, mm-hmm. right? Because at the beginning, I think it was one thing, and the longer I'm in it, it's changed a little bit for mm-hmm. me, right? And all for a positive.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times money becomes the motive, right? And it's a misguided understanding. I'm not saying you can't make that work, right? But are you fulfilled in your life and in what you're calling to do, right?
Absolutely.
So, go ahead. I think I was good.
Yeah, thank you.
Good motive. I like it.
So from that point, I started my own business again, and I wanted it to matter. Before I was when I was a subcontractor, we just erected buildings, and I wanted to create more value, and so that's when I started selling buildings. So all of these guys that worked for me, they were, the purpose in that was they were clean and sober guys that were trying to get a second chance, and so I provided a clean and sober work environment because I believe that a lot of these guys need a little bit more space from being surrounded by drugs and alcohol, especially for a season. If they're getting out of prison or getting back on their feet, and then they go to get a job, and everybody that they work around, because that's the only job they can get, is with drug addicts and alcoholics because of where they're at in life.
Construction seems to be the place.
That's it.
I mean, it is what it is.
Right, and so I felt very strongly about the purpose in having a clean and sober work environment for guys. That was it's difficult though. I mean, my heart goes out to you guys because there's a lot of guys that have a heart like that. I've found that want to give a hand up, or help guys out and get them on their feet and things like that. And it's difficult, especially if you wear your heart on your sleeve, right? And I did, I cared about these guys, and I would lose sleep over these guys because I was literally, working with them day in and day out, and I spent 10 hours a day with them. I think where we started to create some value professionally was when we started to sell buildings, because just being a steel erector for me was not sustainable for how hard we had to work. It seemed like to work guys hard enough to where we could make enough money. It wasn't sustainable for long-term employment. You know, there was like 1 out of 100 guys that could actually, you know, stick with it.
Yeah.
And so
it's hard work in general.
It is. Yeah. And so instead of continuing to demand that, selling the building along with erecting the steel, it gave us some more margin to be able to provide benefits, to work safer, to create sustainability for these employees by not just working them to death, because we are actually making more profit for every job that we do. And it's creating value on the other side, where instead of just being a number with these contractors, it kind of put us up at another level where we can work on design build projects with owners and architects to help them design what they want, and
build the suit, if you will.
Yeah. And so that's what I really began to enjoy, was building relationships with architects and engineers and contractors, and working through things on that side.
Yeah, I think it's another thing that you mentioned that I'd like to kind of rehash for you people that are watching. And we've done it ourselves, and sometimes we got in the weeds a little bit. But you mentioned that, you know, you were doing steel erecting, right? And it's hard labor, right? And it can wear people out. And then you found a vertical, right? You started selling buildings and putting them up. So you found a vertical market within what you were in. And I think that's important for all you entrepreneurs that are listening to this right now, is, you know, whatever you're doing, there's usually a vertical in there that you can add to what you're doing now to create more value and more margin for yourself. And I'll give you just a quick snap of what that means to us and to Josh and I is, you know, we got into the toilets, right? Sanitation, not sexy work by any means, right? But I took that from the concept of maybe a whole job site service company, right? So my next vertical was fencing. The same customers who wanted toilets wanted fencing, right? And they're like, oh, maybe we might be onto something, because fencing just took off. Then we did dumpsters, right? And then we did containers. And along the way, we did a couple of other things that didn't necessarily work out, right? So finding verticals is a very good way, in my opinion, to grow your business, to create more margin. It's more work. Let's not kid ourselves, right? It's more work. But consider that for all you guys that are watching that are entrepreneurs, is look at what you're doing. Think about some ways that you can vertically integrate and add to your business, add to your margins, you know, add to your amount of people that are working around you, and just create yourself a little bit more sustainable company. So I like that. And with that, I think the last thing, a little nugget I'll add is, we had such success in doing that over and over and over. I almost felt like I had a golden touch to some degree, which is not the case. Let me tell you. You know, because everything that I was doing and adding worked out well for us, right? And then until it didn't, right? And then we got ourselves too vertically integrated into things. And then what I found out that happened to me is that I lost maybe too much attention was going to too many things. And I'm no Elon Musk, okay? Right? And we weren't making enough money either to really have the right individuals running those companies, right? So be careful on your verticals as well too. You know, if it works, you know, if you do one vertical and it works, right? It's not going to, for me, it didn't continue to work over and over and over. It worked 4 times, right? But the other 2 times, not so much, right? And thankfully we were doing well enough to where the ones that we had to sell off and lost significant dollars doing so didn't take us down, because we had a sustainable enough company to where we were like, we just cut our losses,